Welcome to Explain It to a Comedian. I'm Dhaya Lakshminarayanan.
And I'm Sammy Obeid.
And I'm Cláudia Custódio.
We're comedians. What do you do?
I'm an associate professor of finance at Imperial College Business School.
That sounds like a good gig. What do you like to study?
Well, I study mostly corporate finance, which is basically the way companies make financial decisions.
And what is your area of expertise?
I would say corporate finance. So basically the way companies make financial decisions and try to make optimal financial decisions.
Are they making good decisions?
On average, I would say yes, but that's a hard question to answer. That's actually what I try to answer it with my research, to see if they make good financial decisions.
What's your research?
Maybe I can tell you about a specific project where I study how financial education of managers can have an impact on firm performance. So basically, so we try to see whether if we teach managers of companies financial concepts, whether they can make better financial decisions. And to do this, we conduct what we call a randomized controlled trial, which is basically a field experiment where we treat a group of managers with some financial expertise, in this case, of course, in finance, and then we compare it to a second group that didn't get the same treatment or the same education.
You ran experiments on managers.
Yes. Put it like this is, yes.
Was it in a lab? Did they get any kind of incentive? How did you get them to do this?
So that's actually a very important question. So we do run these experiments with managers. It's not in a lab, so we don't get them to come to the lab. Actually, we go and meet them where they are. So this is called a field experiment. In this case, we went to meet them in Mozambique. So these managers were in Mozambique.
Were they just there, or did they fly in from other places?
They were just there. So they were basically
lucky managers.
They were basically the CEOs of medium and large companies in Mozambique. And then we invited them to participate in a finance training, and they agreed to participate, right? And we also asked them for their data. So basically, because we wanted to analyze the performance and the way they made decisions after we taught them these financial concepts. And so that was not a lab experiment, but a field experiment, because basically it happened in the field. In this case, the field was Maputo, Mozambique.
Wow, managers in the wild.
I wouldn't call it the wild, but...
Wilding out?
Wild managers also, not necessarily.
Managers gone wild?
No,
Sammy,
I would say comedians going wild now.
I don't know what to say. I'm curious, what did you learn from these experiments?
So what we learn is basically the way these managers make their decisions, and maybe better than that, whether financial education can help them making better financial decisions. So we were specifically teaching them different, how to improve different financial practices. For instance, how to better manage your working capital, how to make better investment decisions, how to make better capital structure decisions, risk management. And then basically we followed up with these managers and their companies, and basically we're able to compare the performance and the decisions that were made at the firm level from the ones who took on this education, and compare them with the ones that did not, right? And basically what we saw was that the ones who took on the financial education were behaving in a different way from the ones that did not. They changed some of their financial decisions, some of their financial practices, but not all of them, which was also interesting.
Based on what they changed, did the performance become better?
Yes, so basically that's what we observed. So the ones that took, actually we ended up, this is part of the research design. So we ended up teaching both what we call the treatment group and the control group as well, just at a later stage. So this is called staggered treatment, because not everyone gets treated at the same time. So everyone got treated in the end. But while the second group was not treated, we could compare their performance, right? And we could see that not only they were changing their financial practices, but also their companies were performing better.
So you went to Mozambique to do an experiment to see if you were a good teacher, and you found out that you are a good teacher.
Exactly, this was all my master plan.
Congratulations. So what kind of things, or was there one particular action that you taught that seemed to yield the best results?
So that's actually a very important question, because we taught them different financial concepts, different financial policies and practices, but not necessarily they implemented everything. So one specific policy that we told them about and that they actually implemented changes on was working capital management. And basically, working capital management are decisions related to, for instance, how much inventory to hold, how fast to collect your debts from your clients, how fast or how late to pay to your suppliers, and so on and so forth. So this has very important implications in terms of your liquidity, the liquidity that the company has, and changing these practices can, for instance, lead to the situation where they can actually have more liquidity in hand and use it to invest.
So for instance, paying your suppliers. Did you advise them to delay and defer payments to suppliers as much as possible?
So that's also a very important question. So not necessarily I told them that they should delay, but I basically highlighted the fact that if they delayed the payment to their suppliers and they anticipate the collections from the clients, they can actually have more cash in hand. This might sound obvious, but not always this is going to be very present to them, or not always. And again, so these are complex organizations, not always they will see immediately that this has liquidity impact. So that's actually something that we saw. So they were not paying late to their suppliers, but actually something that they changed was they started collecting faster from their clients. And this had an impact on, again, how much cash in hand they had.
How did they collect it faster? Did they hire a mean guy with a stick?
I think you might know some of these managers in Mozambique, Dhaya, because actually when we asked them, how did you manage to change your receivables policy? Some of them mentioned that they hired extra people to collect these receivables. Well, we didn't ask them whether these were mean people or not, but you might know something more than I do. So.
Yeah, clearly you know a lot about Mozambique.
I would like to know more.
They have sticks.
No, mean people carry sticks.
It's true.
To beat the liquidity out of people.
And they get wild in Mozambique.
Well, I wasn't there, so I'm relying on your firsthand account of the field work to tell me.
Well, maybe this is going to disappoint you.
Okay, hold on, let me prepare.
We didn't get wild. We simply sat in a room, right? So we basically had managers sitting in a classroom. So this was a very classical setup in terms of education. We got managers to come to a classroom and we taught them finance, as simple as that.
Wow.
No
parties.
No parties, no
boat cruises, no cocktails?
There was a cocktail party. You know, something that was super important for our experimental design
was cocktails.
And let me explain you why. Okay.
Oh, I understand, but please explain.
So I mentioned that there is a treatment group and a control group, right? So something that was very important to us to understand was to see whether they would change their behavior, they would change their financial policies because we were teaching them something, as opposed to them just mingling and networking with the other managers, right? So what we thought about to deal with this confounding effect was that, okay, so maybe while the treatment group is getting their education, we can get the control group just to mingle at a cocktail party. So we run a cocktail party for the control group while the treatment group was getting their education. So by doing this, we were able to say that it was likely that they changed their policies because of the treatment, because of the education, and not as much because of the networking. Because, you know, there's this idea that, for instance, in business school or in college, you mostly benefit from networking and meeting other people. And I'm not saying that that's not important, right? But you might want to disentangle, to separate these two effects, the transfer of knowledge from the networking.
Now, what if you tried a cocktail party where you also teach? Maybe you would have had the most enhanced response.
That's a very insightful suggestion, maybe for my next research project. I can
please.
Yes, I can try that. Teaching while partying.
I didn't suggest partying. I suggested a moderation approach, 1 or 2 cocktails maybe. I don't want to do anything to impact your experiments.
Okay, but you mentioned wild at the beginning. So.
I did. Well,
speaking of wild, this conversation.
We're having...
I'm not sure if we're going to be able to make use of any of this, but...
what were the most wild things you learned from this research? What surprised you?
So something that surprised me was that only specific policies or only specific content had an impact, and not necessarily all of them. Maybe again exposed, looking at the different financial policies that they changed, I could somehow rationalize it and understand it why they did change those policies and not necessarily others. So think in terms of changing the amount of debt that you have, right? So changing your capital structure. So these companies, right, so they operate in Mozambique. Mozambique is a developing economy. It's not necessarily easy to raise external financing. So if you go and teach these managers about, say, the benefits of debt and the fact that the debt has a tax advantage, and suggest them that some of their companies might want to take some more debt, if they then actually go and try to raise these external debt, it might be complicated again, just because of the setting, because of the context of the country. Maybe this is not as much the case when it comes to changing working capital policies, as I mentioned before. So exposed, it was somehow straightforward to realize why some of these worked and some others did not. Ex ante, I was not expecting working capital management to be the main leading mechanism through which performance got enhanced.
Performance enhancing in Mozambique. Thank you so much. Anything that you want to leave us with in terms of a summary of your research, or where you're going next with part 2 of your research, or any follow-on experiments in the field?
Yes. So I would say the main takeaway is the idea that financial education matters. So there is quite a lot of evidence that financial literacy can have an impact on households, on small enterprises, but we lacked evidence that financial education and the education on financial practices could have an impact on medium and large companies. And obviously, if you think about this, large companies represent a large fraction of the economy. So understanding what might improve the performance of these companies, and whether financial practices have an impact, and again, through education, was very important.
Congratulations on your research.
Thank you, Dhaya.
No thanks for me.
Thank you, Sam.